Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and today we've got something slightly different. Instead of showing you battleships getting blown up by sailing in straight lines when there are destroyers around, we're going to show you battleships blowing other stuff up while not sailing around in straight lines when there are destroyers around. This is Joe Can Win in the mighty Fuso, Japanese tier 6 behemoth of a battleship. And we're going to be showing you a bit of Warspite action in this video as well, thanks to Eisen, one of the other players on his team in the Warspite, British tier 6 premium battleship. But it's mostly about Joe Can Win in the Fuso. So, what's the good news, what's the bad news? Well, it's a tier 6 match on the new Dawn map, and he's in a tier 6 battleship. There are 6 battleships in this match, 3 on each team. But the bad news is that this battle is swarming with destroyers. Both teams have 5 of them. In fact, technically you could say that Joe Can Win's team has 4 destroyers and the enemy team have 6, because one of the destroyers on Joe's team is actually working for the enemy. So, what's a battleship captain to do if you're in a match that's being dominated by destroyers and you don't want to end up looking like a complete tit on YouTube? Well, stay away from the islands. Treat every island as if there's an entire flotilla of destroyers lurking in wait for you on the other side of it, because you never know, there might be. Stay in open water. Ensure that there is no concealment within torpedo launch range that a destroyer can use to sneak up and get a torpedo salvo off against you. And if all else fails, don't go sailing around in straight lines. Never spend more than 30 seconds sailing on the same course and speed. Which isn't difficult to do in a battleship, because it can take anything between 20 and 30 seconds for your guns to reload anyway, and you've got nothing better to do while you're waiting for the guns to reload other than change your course and speed. The Fuso didn't actually have a pretty remarkable career. She was built in time for World War I as a dreadnought battleship, but saw no active service whatsoever during World War I. She underwent 2 modernisation refits between the First and Second World Wars, and her Second World War career was equally lackluster. She was in support of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which basically meant she sailed around the ocean for a couple of days in a reserve group, did nothing, and then sailed back to Japan. More or less exactly the same thing happened when she was part of the reserve force in the attack on the island of Midway, where she once again sailed around the ocean for a few days, did nothing, and then returned to Japan. Between then and October 1944, she pretty much just sailed around from one naval base to another, having her equipment refitted and avoiding American air attacks, and she finally met her fate at the Battle of the Surigao Strait on the 24th of October 1944, where, as far as I can tell, the only recorded incident of the Fuso actually firing her 14-inch guns in anger and scoring a hit was in a friendly fire incident when she accidentally fired upon the Japanese heavy cruiser the Megami, hitting her and killing 3 of her crew members in the sickbay. A few hours earlier she'd been hit by bombs dropped by American dive bombers, which had knocked out her number 1 secondary battery, killing all of the crew, and also penetrating the decks of the ship and causing it to take on water and list 2 degrees to starboard. The following morning she was hit by 1, possibly 2 torpedoes fired by what's assumed to have been the destroyer, the USS Melvin, and that was pretty much the end for the Fuso. Of her almost 1,200 crew, a few hundred were picked up by a Japanese destroyer which was itself torpedoed, and so eventually only 10 of the Fuso's crew survived to return to Japan. Not a particularly lucky ship. And Joe's got some strong opposition in this battle, not least of which is the destroyers, which we've already covered, but, well, there's a Warspite and a New Mexico on the enemy team, and they both have bigger guns, if not as many of them, and stronger armour. They don't have the range, though, and they don't have the volume of fire that the Fuso can put out. The Fuso was armed with 12 14-inch guns in 6 gun turrets. Now that's an impressive amount of firepower, but it does have a drawback, and that drawback is the arrangement of the turrets, and I'm talking here about those 2 midships turrets. If you want to take advantage of the Fuso's volume of fire and get all of those guns pointed at your target, you pretty much have to sail broadside onto them, and if that target is another enemy battleship and they're shooting back, well, the Fuso doesn't really have the armour to take those kind of hits, and the Fuso is going to get citadeled. That's not something that you can guarantee you're going to be able to do in return, because you only have 14-inch guns while you do have 12 of them. Targets like the Warspite, and in particular the New Mexico, have very, very well armoured citadels, and even if they're showing you the broadside of the ship, you're not guaranteed to get a citadel penetration and do lots and lots of damage. But they can do it to you. And so sailing a Fuso successfully is all about managing your strengths and your weaknesses. Pay attention to what the enemy battleships are doing. Take note of when they fired, so it's safe for you to turn around and broadside them and get all of your guns firing, and then immediately turn the ship around again to reduce the chance that they're going to get a citadel penetration at your exposed side when they have reloaded. And as an added bonus, manoeuvring like that between shots is going to make you a harder target to hit for any sneaky destroyers who might be lurking around just outside of torpedo range. Speaking of which, check out that Nicholas over there. I'm not entirely sure what he's launched those torpedoes at, because they're not going anywhere near the Omaha, which is bad news for that Fujin, who's just popped out from the other side of the island at high speed and has also managed to miss the Omaha with his torpedoes, but is about to drive straight into one of the torpedoes launched by the Nicholas. And there it is. Awesome! He's just put the enemy team ahead. Not entirely the Nicholas's fault. The Fujin wasn't necessarily visible when he fired off the torpedoes, but, well, it hasn't exactly helped. So, Joe's taken some shots at this New Mexico, which has just managed to ground himself by not paying attention to where he was going and has sailed right into an island. Now, his first salvo did some damage, and some damage is all you can really expect to do against a New Mexico when you're firing 14-inch guns like the guns on the Fuso. Well, hell, even if you're firing 15-inch guns like the guns on the Warspite. The New Mexico has an incredibly tough citadel. But the thing about the New Mexico is that, well, it's basically got this, what they call an all-or-nothing armour package, where all of the armour is around the citadel, and there's no armour anywhere else. So armour-piercing fired from a battleship's guns, even 14-inch guns, like you have on the Fuso, against a New Mexico is very unlikely to penetrate the citadel, but hits anywhere else are going to do consistent, reliable damage that adds up over time. And you pretty much have to chip away at a New Mexico. You're never going to get those spectacular one-shot detonations. Well, you can, but it's exceptionally unlikely. Meanwhile, it's not going particularly well for Joe's team. They've managed to lose 6 ships, although only 5 of them due to enemy fire, and they've only managed to claim 3 kills in return. Now, you could argue that the team have taken this many losses this quickly because the battleships have been lurking around at the back of the map rather than getting up there and directly supporting the cruisers and destroyers. But if you look at where all of those cruisers and destroyers have been sunk, directly up ahead there, they've basically sailed right into a crossfire. And that's not something that the Fuso is particularly good at dealing with due to its relatively weak side armour. You can see the Warspite up ahead there, who did sail into that crossfire, and he's taken a battering, and the Warspite has significantly better armour. Meanwhile, they've just lost yet another cruiser. The Königsberg's just been sunk. Miles away from anybody else. If he was any further north, he would have been on the next map and managed to get himself sunk by the enemy Congo. But Joe is moving up, and he's managed to get all of his guns pointing at the broadside of the enemy Warspite, with some parting shots from the friendly Warspite as he steams south in the other direction. Let's see what the 14-inch guns can do to the broadside of a Warspite, and that's about what you can expect. No citadel penetrations, but a healthy dose of damage. And things are starting to get very, very busy around here. Enemy ships to the left, enemy ships to the right, enemy destroyer in the smoke, return fire from the Warspite. Does a reasonable amount of damage, but the Warspite was very, very unlucky not to citadel Joe's ship. Warspite has 15-inch guns and can penetrate the citadel of the Fuso, especially at a flat angle like that. Joe's got the armour piercing loaded, not the best ammo to use for shooting at a destroyer, but enough shots hit that he sinks him anyway. And he's not going to get torpedoed, which is always nice. Meanwhile, we're just going to switch perspective here to the captain of the Warspite over there, Eisen, as he's headed down to the south to try to intercept a whole force of enemy ships who are coming around and threatening to catch what remains of Joe's team in a crossfire. Now, Joe is turning to react to that threat as well, but for the moment at least, it's pretty much all down to the Warspite. Here he comes. This is Eisen in the friendly Warspite on the team, and we've rewound the clock slightly to as he passed to just astern of Joe Canwin's Fuso and put some shots of his own into the enemy Warspite over there. Well, let's just have a look and see exactly what kind of trouble this guy's steaming into. So there's a Mutsuki, the Japanese Tier 6 destroyer. There's some gunfire there coming from a Kuma, Japanese Tier 4 cruiser, who's only Tier 4 but has a lot of torpedoes. And also that New Mexico off in the background. So, well, I think that's quite enough to handle for one battleship. Now, The thing about the Warspite is it's not particularly fast, the turrets take a long time to turn around. Manoeuvrability, however, isn't too bad. The rudder shift time isn't great, but once the ship does start turning, and it takes some time to start turning, it tends to turn pretty quickly. And another thing about the Warspite is that when it starts turning, it loses speed drastically. So if you expect torpedoes to be fired at you as the Warspite opens up on the Mutsuki with its secondaries and kills him, just slow down and start turning, and you'll find you reduce speed drastically. Now the downside to that is that while it can slow down very quickly and is easily able to avoid all of these torpedoes by slowing down and turning, that leaves you dead in the water, and the Warspite takes a good long time to speed up again. But if you're not expecting any additional torpedoes to be fired at you, this is a remarkably useful tactic for avoiding instant death when you've got torpedoes heading in your direction and you're in a Warspite. And he's managed to avoid every single one of all of those torpedoes fired at him from both the Mutsuki and the Kuma. Not only that, but he's positioned the ship in such a way that he can get all of his gun turrets firing at the Kuma and does monstrous amounts of damage to him. In fact, was unlucky not to sink him, but he's also got the bows of the ship pointing straight at the New Mexico, so the New Mexico doesn't really have anywhere to shoot the Warspite where he's going to do a large amount of damage. But that Kuma turned around, and so Eisen starts speeding up, because that can only be to fire more torpedoes from the other side. Now he sinks the Kuma, but he's already anticipating the torpedoes being on the way, and all of those miss him as well. Battleship captains, I hope you've been paying attention. If Eisen can do that in a Warspite, then you need to stop making excuses and just get good, son. Meanwhile, Joe in the Fuso has been trying to support Eisen as best he can with some 14-inch gunfire against that New Mexico, but, well, he's certainly scoring the hits, but he's never going to get a citadel penetration with a 14-inch gun. Well, he might, but it's going to be exceptionally unlikely that you're going to penetrate the citadel of a New Mexico with the 14-inch guns on the Fuso. Nevertheless, the damage is starting to mount up, and that New Mexico just ran out of friends. He came around here with Mutsuki and Akuma, expecting an easy kill on a Warspite, and, well, that hasn't happened. Now it's at this point that the Nürnberg spots a Farragut, and he was assisting with the attack on the New Mexico. He's actually managed to set him on fire. But now he's concentrating on that Farragut. He was spotted at a range of about 10 kilometers from Joe, so substantially closer to the Nürnberg, and has popped a smoke screen and has temporarily disappeared. Joe is doing some decent damage to this New Mexico. In fact, he's doing about as much as you could expect to do with the Fuso's 14-inch guns. But he's not going to be able to fire at this New Mexico for much longer, although he has managed to knock one of his gun turrets out, so that's going to be good news for Eisen in the Warspite, who is still very much committed to fighting that New Mexico. In fact, the two of them are going to have a brief moment of silence as they both pass around opposite sides of that island, and then they're going to be engaged in a point-blank range gunnery duel. And this is actually the first time in this battle that Joe's actually come under fire from a cruiser, so he's never had the threat of being set on fire before. And the Cleveland is... no, wait for it. Wait, let him turn. Now take the shot. Showing the side of a cruiser to a battleship. That's a paddling. At the same time, however, Joe did get a little bit lucky there, because the enemy Warspite waited until Joe was showing the broadside of his ship when he was halfway through the turn to fire his 15-inch guns at Joe, but wasn't able to score a citadel penetration. That Farragut, however, is proving to be a major annoyance. He's set Joe on fire in two separate locations, and it's probably worth using the damage control ability now, and in fact that is what he does. Battleships who get set on fire by cruisers and destroyers. Almost never worth using your damage control ability when you're only burning in one location. Your crew are going to put the fire out for you. Take it from somebody who loves to play cruisers and American destroyers. I love nothing more than seeing a battleship that I'm shooting at waste their damage control ability the very first time I set them on fire. Because I'm going to set you on fire again, and again, and again, and you're going to keep burning. Meanwhile, the enemy New Mexico pops up again, and he's managed to do remarkably well. He's sunk Eisen in the Warspite, and we last saw him on 16,000 health, so he's managed to recover 10,000 health as well. So, Joe angles himself as much as it's safe to do so, and get as many guns as possible firing at the New Mexico, and proceeds to buckle in and start chipping away at his health once again. And he's angled well against the New Mexico, but the New Mexico is spotting in for the Warspite, and he's not angled against the Warspite. And with that amount of health gone in one shot, he's suddenly not looking too good against the New Mexico either. Now, the Nürnberg went off to chase the Farragut and has lost him, and so isn't able to offer any direct support at the moment. The Nicholas, the guy who accidentally team-killed the Fusion earlier, is putting down as much high explosive as he possibly can, as that looked like another good solid hit right in the flank from the Warspite. Joe cannot sustain this kind of damage for much longer. They're now closing it within secondary battery range, and there's the Warspite. You cannot angle the Fuso against both of these ships at the same time. So Joe's going to have to come up with something, and he's going to have to come up with it fast. Now, he's managed to knock out one of the New Mexico's gun turrets, so there's that. And he's almost ready to start recovering some health, which is fantastic. And again, he's doing some good damage to the New Mexico, but it's not going to be enough. Now, he takes a bit of a risk here, but it's take a risk or die. And he starts trying to get around the New Mexico and beat his gun turret rotation. Now, this is risky because the two front turrets may still be able to fire at point-blank range right into the side of his ship. But here comes the Nicholas, and he's launched 4 torpedoes. And Joe's just about ready to get one gun pointing at this guy. The New Mexico eats 3 of the torpedoes, not enough to sink in. Joe fires, boom, headshot, slams the brakes on, narrowly avoids being team killed by the Nicholas, but I think under the circumstances it was a perfectly acceptable risk. And the Nicholas screams into a hard turn, deploys smoke, and completely redeems his earlier accidental team kill on the Fusion by shielding Joe from observation from the Warspite and the Congo, which have now just appeared off in the other direction, and basically saves Joe's ass. Well, I say saved his ass, and he has. He saved him from immediate destruction, but that's what's basically a full health Warspite and a full health Congo, rapidly steaming in this direction. So Joe needs to take advantage of the breathing space that the Nicholas has earned for him. He needs to get himself into a position where he's not going to get immediately killed by these two guys. And so, well, that island is looking like a likely candidate. And is that Congo sailing broadside? He is. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Sailing broadside on to the guns of a Fuso. That's a paddling. Look at that. High caliber award, 9 penetrations. None of them were citadels, and he still took half the health of the Congo off. And I don't think the Congo liked that very much, so he's going to return fire. It doesn't do enough damage. I think the Congo could only fire his front 2 turrets at him, and Joe, well, the Fuso doesn't accelerate particularly well, but he's accelerating as fast as he can to get behind that island. So the Congo can't get his 2 rear turrets swung around, and more importantly, the Warspite can't shoot at him either, because the Warspite has some seriously big guns, and while they're not incredibly accurate at that range, they cannot miss. Well, alright, they can miss at that kind of range. In fact, I've seen them miss at that kind of range, but they're unlikely to. Now, since they're not able to shoot at Joe momentarily, in fact Joe hasn't been spotted, and the Warspite's launching his spotter aircraft to attempt to rectify that situation, they're shifting their fire against the Nürnberg, who's managed to find and sink the Farragut finally, and the Nicholas. So those two guys, and you can hardly blame them, are bugging out. But they're still occupying the attention of the Warspite and the Congo for the moment, and Joe's managed to get his guns reloaded. He's slowing to a halt, and he's managed to start recovering some health as well. And that's not a particularly good shot against the Congo. The Congo's in the turn. He's pursuing the friendly cruiser and the friendly destroyer. They've still got shots against the cruiser. Looks like the Nicholas has managed to get into cover. The Congo is turning, however. Is he going to give us the broadside of the ship again? Well, kind of yes, kind of no. The Warspite, on the other hand, is giving us the broadside of the ship. And this is close range for battleship guns. So Joe's going to go for the Warspite. It's only slightly angled. The Warspite's secondaries are opening up. Let's hope Joe doesn't get set on fire. And while the Warspite... Look at that. Again, no citadel penetrations. Just multiple solid penetrating armor-piercing hits. And the Warspite has now been caught with his guns all pointing in the other direction. Although they have managed to sink the Nürnberg. And there are some torpedoes in the water against the Congo, which means he is going to be manoeuvring and having a hard time bringing his guns around to point at Joe. And it looks like Joe is going to get the fire again before the Warspite can turn his turrets. And while it is difficult to score a citadel penetration on a Warspite, it's not impossible. And he's managed to not just citadel the Warspite, he's also knocked out one of his guns. So this is incredibly good news for Joe, because while he's not showing his citadel to the Warspite, with 4 15-inch guns up front, At this kind of angle, he could still do enough armour-piercing damage to sink Joe, particularly firing into the stern of the ship where the armour is very, very bad. But now he only has 2 of those guns that he can fire. Joe fires again, knocks out his other frontal gun turrets. So now all the Warspite can fire at him are his secondary batteries, unless he's prepared to risk taking another citadel and swings the back end of the ship around to bring his rear gun batteries to bear, but it's too little too late. Joe's safely in cover behind the island again. But they're still going to lose unless somebody sinks a ship right now. They're behind on points and there are bare seconds of this match left, and the Nicholas can't spot anybody because he's on the other side of an island, all the way over there. So it's up to Joe to spot either the Congo or the Warspite, and his reversing allows him to do exactly that, and that's just what the Nicholas was waiting for, as he launches that high explosive and with exactly 0 seconds left on the clock finishes off the Warspite and wins the game. Pretty solid performance there, I think you'll agree, from Joe Can Win in the Fuso, as well as Eisen in the Warspite and Charles in the Nürnberg. And a last minute game save there which completely redeemed his earlier accidental team kill of the Fusion by Fly Dude 22 in the Nicholas. And that's it for today. Later on today I'll be checking into a hotel down at the Tank Museum in order to be ready bright and early Friday morning for a Wargaming hosted Community Contributor Day at the Tank Museum itself. Saturday and Sunday, obviously, I'll see you guys all at Tankfest. Which does mean I'm going to be away from home, and therefore away from my video rendering and editing equipment, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Now what I don't want to do is leave you completely video free Friday and Saturday, so what I'm going to do is pull a double shift after doing this video, get what would normally be Saturday's XCOM 2 video done and uploaded and scheduled for release on Friday. And yes, that does mean there isn't going to be a video on Saturday, but hey, even an evil mastermind has to sleep every now and then. Anyway, that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.